My name is Ken Morse, and I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm the chairman of the Olympia Tea Party, aka Informed Citizen Network. And the book Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky is what many politicians today are using. Some have suggested that we use their tactics as well. I don't think that's a great idea, but there are ways of diffusing Alinsky's arguments and their tactics. And I recommend the book Rules for Radicals Defeated, a practical guide for defeating Obama/Alinsky tactics. It's by Jeff Hedgepeth, Hedgpeth. So there's an answer to the Alinsky tactics, and it's an interesting read. I think it's very informative, and check it out. So I'm going to turn this over to Richard Burke, and he's the chairman of Western Liberty Network. And so give a hand for Richard today.
Thank you very much. I am really excited to be here. My wife Natasha is back there. I'll introduce her in a moment. But I'd like to begin by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you wouldn't mind turning around and standing, I have a flag over here. And Ken, if you would be so kind as to lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. I would also like to ask if there's anyone here who is a veteran. I think we've had a couple people that have served. Do we have some veterans in the room? We've got a few. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Always like to honor our veterans. And while we're doing this today, I'd like to ask that everybody take out their cell phones and silence them. If you need to make a call or you need to take a call, go ahead and go in the back of the room. Otherwise, we're going to try and go through this with as few interruptions as possible, except from you, as we discuss the various topics we're going to consider today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Richard Burke, and I'm the executive director of the Western Liberty Network. I'm currently the vice chair of the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, the state ethics board. I've been elected to 3 local nonpartisan offices over 8 elections, been reelected a few times to some of those. I've worked in the Oregon legislature as a legislative aide. I was a third-party nominee for Oregon governor in 1998. And so when I talk to you about the various topics we're going to train on today, it's not like I think I'm any sort of genius. It's just I've been around the lap a bunch of times in a lot of different ways. And I think it's really important that we build the infrastructure for success. I would also like to introduce my wife, Natasha Burke. She is a recent U.S. citizen from Ukraine. She was sworn in just a couple of months ago, and I'm very, very proud of her. She is an activist as well. She was at the protest tent with Boris Yeltsin when they were firing cannon rounds into the Parliament building, and she was right there in the middle of it. And she is a lover of freedom and America, and she has been a partner for me as I've gone through all of this, and I'm very grateful to her. Ken, I've known Ken for a few years. We've worked together on some projects, and he's a true patriot, and he's helping me in Washington State. He's the Western Liberty Network Washington State Director, in addition to being head of the Olympia Tea Party and so forth. Now, you see some documents in front of you, and you probably see Western Liberty Network here, there, WLN here, there. Western Liberty Network is a 501c3 organization, nonprofit, nonpartisan. But it is a limited government organization that's designed to train grassroots activists how to take responsibility for their own governance. And what that means is training people how to run for local nonpartisan office, how to get elected to local nonpartisan office, how to serve effectively once they get elected or appointed to office, how to be strong citizen lobbyists, and how to be involved as a campaign volunteer or even a campaign manager. The idea is to build a farm team by building cadres of local elected officials, people who can run campaigns, people who can work on campaigns, and people who are good citizen lobbyists. It is important that we build this infrastructure. All too often I'll see a pro-government candidate come to the fore when there's an opening, and people will say, well, who should we get? And the people who like government can say, well, This person served in the county commission. This person's been on a city council. This person's been on a school board. We can select all these people, and because they've served in office, they have networks of donors and volunteers and other people who can endorse them and media contacts and all the things they need to be successful. And all too often, somebody who supports limited government, they'll say, well, we don't really have anybody. Let's run a business person. And that's fine. We love business people, but they start behind the 8 ball because they don't have those things. And then they run, they lose, and you never see them again. And sometimes they shoot too high by running for Congress when they've never held office before. The idea is that we have to reweave the fabric of our political culture. Limited government activists can win the White House. They can win the governor's mansion, and they can win majorities in both state legislatures. But even if those victories come to pass, they're not sustainable unless the underlying political culture supports it. And that's where the grassroots come in. And that's where the grassroots can become effective. The changes that you saw under Ronald Reagan, the changes that you're seeing under Donald Trump, they're transitory unless the political culture can survive them when they're gone, whether they're reelected or elected. And that is where you have the power. The grassroots activists have the power to define the political culture. I like to use the phrase, we need to reweave the fabric of our political culture. If you have a fabric made up of a lot of threads and they're all one color, you need to start replacing those threads one at a time. One might be a school board member. One might be a cemetery control board director. One might be a county commissioner. You start replacing these threads one by one with a new color, soon the hue of that fabric starts to change. And then you've got a political culture that can not only achieve victories, but can sustain victories as well. Now, the Western Liberty Network is not partisan, and I want to stress that. We're not a Republican group, we're not a Libertarian group, we're not anything. And if liberals wanted me to provide them with training, I would be obliged to do it. But they don't, because they have their own groups. People in the limited government movement do not have a lot of groups like this. Political parties sometimes try to focus on local office holders, but it's difficult for them to maintain focus because they have so many other things to do. And some of the DC-based organizations, they'll provide training, but they fly into major cities for a weekend, do some seminars, and then they fly out. We need to have a presence throughout the state, and by we, I mean people who support limited government have to have a year-round presence throughout the state, not just in the metropolitan areas. And that's what Western Liberty Network tries to do. Western Liberty Network has developed curriculum, 26 units of training, and we're always developing more. And the way we disseminate this training is through independent affiliates. Independent affiliates are groups that can be Freedom Works, Americans for Prosperity, they can be Tea Party, 912, whatever they are. And independent affiliates sign an agreement that in exchange for receiving training from Western Liberty Network, which they can use selectively as they wish, in exchange for that, they agree to make their rank and file members aware of the training opportunities, and also that their leaders will participate in an annual convention and periodic conference call to share best practices. That's it. The independent affiliates are independent in every way. They're not subordinate chapters of Western Liberty Network. And so the groups can endorse who they like or not endorse who they like, and they're not restricted by 501c3 rules because they're not an organ of Western Liberty Network. They're an independent organization. Yet they get the benefits of being a part of a large network of groups and can share best practices and obtain the skills they need to be politically successful. And what we're going to be doing today is talking about 4 topics that relate to being politically successful. But before I do that, I would like to ask, we've got enough people here to have a really good group, but the group is small enough where we can very briefly introduce ourselves and sort of give me one line about what you'd like to get out of the conference today. So if you don't mind, sir, I'd like to begin with you. Could you please introduce yourself and say what you're hoping to get out of the meeting today?
Jerry Baker, what I'm interested in is something like this I've had for a long time. That's that we must deliver better candidates. And however we do that, that's for me.
Thank you very
Even
much.
though there may be some things that I hear, okay?
Okay, very good. And as I'm doing the training today, please feel free to interrupt me, ask a question. It's not the kind of deal where I talk and talk and talk and then ask questions when I'm done. I want this to be an interactive experience. And how about you, ma'am?
I'm not running for any office, but I want to know how to help people get into office.
Okay.
I want to be a part of that team.
Barbara is the chairwoman for the Grant County Republican Party.
We spoke last
Last
night. And I want to thank you. You're one of the people, and we'll get to the others here today, who helped put this organization or this meeting together with Ken. So thank you very much. And your name, ma'am?
I'm Peggy Bates. I am not running for office either, but very involved in the activist movement of non-limited government. I'm the district captain for Convention of States, so I work heavily with that.
Very good. You, sir?
Yeah, my name's John. Not running for anything, but told about this and was very curious to see what you had to offer here. So,
Very good. And you?
Practically the same thing. My name's John, and I was invited, and I'm just seeing what's going on here.
I'm glad you came today. Thank you. And you?
Susan Freeman. I'm actually a successful candidate for school board last term. Have worked as a social media worker for a few successful campaigns and his friend.
He also runs the local Senate.
Okay, well, that's important too. You, sir.
My name is Wes. I am a businessman. I have been with the miscolored red party for a
They
long
stole
time.
our color.
And PCO and things, and watched how the system worked, and it has room for improvement without question. So,
Thank you very much. By the way, this is the proprietor of this fine establishment. Lucita, is that? Letitia, my mistake. So we'll give her a hand of applause later. And what's your name, young lady? I'm sorry? Sela Loomis. Well, thank you very much for coming today. We'll try not to bore you too much. Okay? And this is my wife, Natasha. We already discussed that. You want to say anything?
Yes, I would like to tell that I'm very happy to be here and meet you so active, and I'm so proud to be American and be the part of the good movement, and just make the change in this country. Just lovely people, just support what my husband doing, and be the part of the good things.
She's awesome. She's absolutely awesome. And do you want to say anything else? Yes, ma'am?
Our former chair goes to Camaign every year. I'd probably be interested in meeting him. Sorry he's not here.
Yeah, they've got issues right now, don't they? Do you want to say anything else, Ken?
No, I'm fine. So, yeah, I'll hang around a little bit afterwards, and if you want to talk, that'd be great. Love to talk.
How about you?
I'm Julia, and Ken and I met when he ran the Olympia Tea Party, and I was involved in starting the Tea Party here. I'm a PCO, and just kind of a nosy into politics. I just get nosy.
Well, that's okay. We need that. And you, sir?
I'm Gordon. I'm a good friend of Julia's, and I'll support her in any way I can.
He's a great piano player, and he's Canadian.
I am. I'm actually both.
Nobody's perfect. I'm just kidding. That's right.
He's a doodle.
I'm Rayanne Journey, and I really want to see how we can better serve people who are Republicans and conservatives that are running for office, and how we can better build groups to concentrate our efforts in better areas. So I'm looking forward to this.
Very good. In the Cover Your Rear department, if you're Republicans or Democrats or anything else and want to take this training and help your party, God bless you. But Western Liberty Network is staunchly nonpartisan. We're required to be. And so I just got to make that clear for whoever might be watching this recording in the future. And yes, you, sir.
Okay. Hi, my name is Brian Journey. I'm a commercial fisherman and a truck driver here in town. And Ran here is my wife, and I've been following her
political career here for the last few years. She's been very involved, and so I'm here to get educated and to learn how things work around here, and hopefully I can get involved a little more. And I think my wife would like that also.
Very good. Now, I'm told by Ken that Rayanne just did a yeoman's job of getting the word out and enlisting some of the other influential decision makers in this room today. So thank you very much for your good work in all of this. And look forward to working with you. So, okay, let's get this thing rolling. The only other question is we are going to have lunch today. And so is there any kind of a consensus on when you'd like to break for lunch? Do you want to break at noon, take a break then? Is that all right? Because I think that gives us time to get through at least one of the trainings if we do that. Okay? Okay, very good. And I will tell you this. I heard a couple of things as I went around the table, and I heard a lot of people say, I'm not going to run for office. I'm not running for office. How many people here have run for office in the past? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That counts. Yep, that counts. 6, 7. That's good. So a lot of people have run for office, and this training, you'll find, gives people the confidence to run for office when they thought they might not before. Now, it's not for everybody, and we're not telling everybody that they have to run for office, but I'd much rather limited government activists made decisions in positions of responsibility than pro-government people did. Yes, Ken?
You might mention that there are boards and commissions that need people to fill positions. They're usually appointed.
Yep, that's right.
They're desperate for volunteers usually. And
Yep.
that's a good place to get your people, especially if you're really focused on a particular issue. It might be farming, it might be environmental,
That's right.
or whatever. There might be a board or commission looking just for you.
I'm very proud of the fact that over 80% of the people who have run for local office that have taken WLN training have actually gotten elected to the office that they were running for. That's a really good record. In Oregon, there are about 7,000 local nonpartisan offices. Half of them come up every other year on odd-numbered years, generally with 4-year terms. The number for that is even higher in Washington. We're beginning a survey. A guy named Mark Delphine is going to be helping Ken do a survey of every elected position and then appointed position in Washington, and Ken is quite right. There are a lot of appointed positions, planning commissions, budget committees, advisory committees that people can apply for, and it's important that we get people who love limited government principles into these positions. It's harder for us. I've been to some liberal organizations. They've invited me to speak from time to time to be sort of the token limited government activist. And before the meeting starts, they socialize. And while they're eating hors d'oeuvres and whatever they're doing, they share, oh, what are you running for this time? Or what are you running for? Are you running for Park and Rec? To them, running for local office is a social experience. It's fun. It's like going bowling or whatever it is. You go to a conservative meeting and it's different. They tend to be concerned with their businesses and their families, and they see serving in local nonpartisan office as sort of like doing a hitch in the military or doing a chore that they don't want to do. And so that means we have to make a volitional effort. The whole concept of self-governance is that we have to govern ourselves. And the left, God bless them, they've stepped up. The right, some of them have, like some of the people in this room that have raised their hands, but a lot of them don't step up, or they don't even want to help somebody who is stepping up. That's what has to change, and it's going to happen from the grassroots out. And when you find somebody who's willing to run for an office or seek appointment to an office, you need to give them a copy of this. This is the first unit we're going to cover today. The Candidate Assessment Guide. This is designed for somebody who is thinking about running for office. It's designed to help them realistically consider the kind of office that they could run for and have a reasonable expectation that they could win. This allows them to come up with what I call a proto-campaign plan. This helps them sort of orient themselves and take action that will lead to their election. Some of this stuff will be obvious to you, but some of it's not. And so I'm going to go over this stuff. The first thing I tell people is when they decide they're going to run for office, they need to think about their general appearance. Because when you are a candidate for local office, you don't just want to look nice when you're going to a candidate forum or you're being interviewed by the newspapers. You want to look good all the time. If you're in a restaurant and you're talking about an election or you're meeting people out in the field, you want to look like someone who would reasonably hold the office that you're running for. You want people to be able to see you in public and take a look at how you're put together and say, yeah, I can picture you as my school board member or my city councilor. Because when they vote for you, when they vote for a candidate, they are putting their homes into their hands because office holders set property taxes, regulations, can you cut your tree, building codes, and your businesses, what the taxpayers are. So you want to come off as somebody who is serious. I've seen people who run for office, and while they're a candidate, they go around in flip-flops and shorts and old ragged t-shirts, and they're like, oh, I don't need to dress up, it's a Saturday. When you're a candidate, project the image of somebody who would be a good office holder. Now, I know I don't have to deal with that. That's not an issue among the people in this room. I don't want to insult anybody. But as you pass this information on to folks who maybe are not as politically sophisticated as you are, this is an important point to consider. Second thing is professionalism. People who run for office need to be willing to train themselves, to acquire the skills that will allow them to function professionally. That might mean join a Toastmasters club, so you learn how to be a better public speaker, so you know how to organize arguments. Prepare yourself in this way. Another thing that you can do is there's an organization called the National Association of Parliamentarians. It's very easy to join, and it's where you learn Robert's Rules of Order. And Robert's Rules of Order is where, that's the set of rules that most governing boards use to operate. And if you know Robert's Rules of Order, you can get a lot more done than if you don't know Robert's Rules of Order. I like to say, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. And Robert's Rules of Order is a little bit like that. But the idea is, find out what skills you will need to hold the office that you're running for, and then look at opportunities, low cost or no cost opportunities, to improve your skill set with respect to the skills that you will need to perform well in office. Another one is philosophy. The candidate should have a clear idea of one's political orientation and be able to apply it to the position he or she is seeking. I served on the Tualatin Valley Water District Board of Commissioners. And people would say, well, Rich, you're a limited government guy. How can you possibly advance that on a water board? And you would be astonished at how many times you can. For example, should we condemn property? Right? I voted against eminent domain every time it came up before our board, and fought very hard for it. I fought for low water rates, and in many cases I was able to win. There were a lot of different things that are small that impact people's daily lives where you can apply limited government principles. Doesn't matter what it is. If it's a vector control board, if it's a cemetery control board. In Oregon, there's actually a local elected board that deals with ham radio operators authorized to speak for county government in disasters. And so these are all important positions, and with regard to the use of your resources, whether or not you intrude into people's lives, whether or not you impact people's property, whether you increase the cost of doing business, there are always ways that you can apply your ideological principles to the office that you hold. And that's what I ask people to do. Think hard about your political grounding, your political orientation, and then give some thought to how you can apply your basic philosophy to the office that you're seeking. Now, where that becomes helpful in campaigns is that if people ask you a question about some aspect of the office that you hadn't thought of before, if you're well grounded and you've thought about it, it's going to be easier to come up with an intelligent answer on any particular item. And it's also going to make you a better office holder. Financial resources. It doesn't cost a lot of money to run for local nonpartisan office. Sometimes it costs none, but sometimes it costs some. And you need to think before you run about how much money you're willing to spend. This has caused a lot of arguments between husbands and wives. And if you're going to run for local nonpartisan office, you've got to have your family behind you, particularly your spouse. And one way to get your spouse really ticked off at you is to spend more money on your political campaign than the spouse might like to see. You need to come to an agreement right off the bat. You can raise money as well, and Western Liberty Network does do training on how to raise money, how campaigns can raise money. But generally, some investment is required if you're running for a mid-profile office. The last time I ran for re-election on the Tualatin Valley Water District, I didn't spend anything. Before that, the time before, I spent about $1,000. Time before that, I spent about $1,000. But whatever it is, make sure that you know how much you're willing to invest in your campaign, and make sure that your family is on board. Skeletons. They say everybody has skeletons in their closets. Now, I don't know if that's true. There are probably some people that don't, but a lot of people do. And what are those skeletons? Most of the time, it's not bad. Some people think that certain things are skeletons that aren't, okay? I've had a divorce in my life. Some people think that that's a skeleton, you know? When I was 11 years old, I got arrested for stealing a baseball cap and got in trouble, and my dad made me wear my Boy Scout uniform to the judge's office. It was humiliating, but I learned my lesson, right? Some people might think that this is a skeleton in the closet. Whatever you think you have in the way of a skeleton, think about it in advance. Because if you think about it in advance, you can imagine that someone might dig up that skeleton, and you will be ready with a response. Okay? You will be ready with some kind of a response. Take a look at what's going out there in politics today. People have all kinds of skeletons out there. But if they have intelligent explanations that says, you know, this was 20 years ago, I made a mistake, it's never happened again, I've been an upstanding citizen, I've been a good father, mother, parent, PTO, so this person is just taking a cheap shot, at me. I wonder how they'd hold up under similar scrutiny. I mean, that's a response. And that's a way to kind of make it boomerang on the people that are giving you an attack. I had a $12,000 campaign to unseat me the last time I ran for re-election on my water district. No kidding. There was a party faction issue in my party, and I was libertarian, elected libertarian, serving on the water board, and we had a party faction thing, and a guy named Lars, he decided to run against me, who was also a libertarian. And it made news because it's the first time an incumbent libertarian had been challenged by another libertarian, and they spent $12,000 on hit pieces against me to try and get me not elected. And I was able to thwart them all because they were all groundless, and I actually got a lot of sympathy from the media. But you wouldn't have thought you needed to deal with that on a water board race or in a small board race. But just think about what you have in the way of skeletons in your closet and come up with answers for them the way I did, so that if you get attacked, you'll be able to blunt those attacks. Most of the time, it won't happen, but once in a while it can. Yes, Ken?
The lesson of Richard Nixon is it's more damaging to try to hide it than to come out with, okay, yeah, I screwed up.
Yep.
Or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So having an intelligent, straightforward, sort of response ready to go, this gives it.
The hit piece that went against me had a lot to say about water rates having increased over the previous 10 years. And they did, because we didn't have our own water source. We bought our water wholesale from the city of Portland, and they would give us annual double-digit rate increases, and at some point we had to pass them on. So I knew that was going to be a hit, that the water rates had gone up, but I went into the history and found out why, and I had a good response. It didn't work. So whatever it is that you think could hurt your election chances, think about it, be honest with yourself, and then come up with some kind of a response, and then you'll be ready. Extremism. Now, by extremism, I'm not talking about things that we would all agree is extreme. I'm talking about ways in which you might be painted as extreme. Like, let's say you're a pro-life person, okay? If you're a pro-life person, you might have an opponent who tries to paint you as extreme because you're a pro-life person, okay? Or if you support the Second Amendment, your opponent might try to paint you as an extremist because you support the Second Amendment, okay? So think about the different issues that you have, even if they have nothing to do with the race that you would be running for. I remember Brad Avakian, former Democratic state senator in Oregon, ran for Secretary of State as a Democrat. And he tried to paint the Republican, Dennis Richardson, as an extremist because he was conservative, he was pro-life, he was pro-Second Amendment. Those issues have nothing to do with the role of the Secretary of State, which deals with election and corporate registration and all of that. The Secretary of State has nothing to say about it. But Brad Avakian tried to paint Richardson as an extremist by noting some of the positions that he had as a conservative. That could happen to you. It probably won't, because if you're running for a cemetery control board directorship, you know, your opponent is probably not going to use that level of sophistication to attack you. But I always encourage people to be prepared for this, and that's something that you can do to prepare yourself. Look at some of the positions that you hold as a limited government activist and decide which of them you think an opponent could try to paint as extreme, and then think about how you would answer that. The way that Dennis Richardson answered it is he would say, well, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice or anything in between, has nothing to do with this office. And it seems to me that the Democrat doesn't know enough about the office to serve, because he keeps bringing up issues that have nothing to do with this office. So it backfired on him. In Oregon, the Republican won that race. And it's the only race that a Republican won in 16 years that was statewide. And so things like that can be turned around. Community involvement. If you're thinking about running for office, think about getting involved in the community. I was a member of my local Optimist Club for a number of years, and Elks Club, volunteered at the high school in an annual barbecue, and I know a lot of you are already volunteers in your community because, well, let's face it, you're Tea Party members. You've taken positions of leadership. You've been active in the past. But if you're going to run for office, think about being involved in the community, because when you're a candidate, it's good to be able to say that you're involved in the community. It assures people that you're not just running for your own gratification, you're running because you care about the community and you've been tied into the community before. So these are a few things that you can do that are going to set the stage for victory before you even file. You know, if you think about it, if you've got a person who's thinking about running for a school board position or a park and rec position or a fire and rescue position, if they go around town looking reasonable, business casual, or just, you know, well put together, if they improve their professional skills and other people are seeing them improve their professional skills, if they're well grounded in their philosophy and they have an idea of how they would like to govern, and so they would be able to apply that philosophy to the issues that come before them, if they've decided how much money they want to invest in their campaign and they've got their family on board, if they've thought about what skeletons they might have in their closet and how to respond if they're brought to the light, if they've taken a look at their positions that could be mischaracterized as extreme and come up with ways to counter that force, and if they're involved in the community. See, if these things happen, you're in a very good position to win a local nonpartisan race before you even start. It's laying down the foundations of victory. Are there any questions so far? Yes.
Identical form of buffet is better sooner than later.
Okay.
It's all the cheeses that get hard.
They get coagulated.
Yeah. I just let people know this would be a good time.
Okay, well, let me deal with questions. We can. Oh, did you have something to say?
Yes, I wanted to know, as far as extremism goes, about religion.
Yes. Well, what are you asking me specifically?
Well, I'm asking you that, for example, when Trump was called out, he went and was talking about religion.
Yeah.
Well, he gave him the impression that he was a religious person, and that didn't go at all with these people. But eventually, I think that was overcome.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I would say, is if you go overboard on religion, how is it going to affect you? How do you keep your integrity and not, you know, understand what I'm saying?
What you're talking about has more to do with authenticity than it does with a specific religion. I think that, yeah, now most people in this country are willing to accept office holders of almost any religion. I don't know about, some strange witch doctor religions they might not accept, or some of those, really eccentric. I don't know how accepting they would be of that. But, we've had Catholic presidents, we've had Mormon nominees for president, we've had a variety of people of different Protestant faiths, and arguably a Muslim. So, yeah. So he denies it, but other people are pretty sure that the opposite is true. And so, but anyway, I think Americans are pretty tolerant. So the question is, are you authentic? Is your practice of religion, or the fact that you profess to be religious, is it perceived as being authentic? And for people who are running for local nonpartisan office, I don't think it is. I've never seen it an issue since I was a kid, when the voter pamphlets in Nebraska used to say what their religion was. They don't do that anymore, and I've never seen it really be an issue at the local level. But if it does become an issue, all I can say is be authentic, and you won't have a problem. Yes.
My comment was on financial resources. It's this small county in the middle of nowhere, and the finances that I have run into, two and a half times that I've been involved in, either helping someone run for office or run for offices. I think it's fantastic. I mean,
But what's fantastic?
It's too much for the average home to take on. You spend 1,000, we spent 5, and it's just, I don't know how to, that's one of the things that I think is hard to overcome when getting someone to run for office.
It's very tough to overcome, and that's why, augmenting whatever a family can afford to invest in the race, they need to raise money, and that is another training, and I can talk about that a little bit today as well, in addition to the things that I already planned to discuss. Now, there's more to this particular training before we go to the next one, but the point is well taken that the lunch might be better if it's sooner rather than later. Does anyone object if we take a little time for lunch right now? No. Okay, I'm going to pick up again while everybody's eating, if that's okay. Let me ask you so far, do you think that this information is useful up to this point? Generally? Okay. And if you don't, please tell me, because I'm always improving the content of these trainings to try and make them more valuable. So I appreciate you think this is good. Now, on the back side of this same sheet, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a candidate self-assessment form. If you're thinking of running for office, or you know anybody who is thinking of running for local office, have them fill out this form. This form does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it helps people decide what level of office they might want to run for. I've seen a lot of limited government activists who are very ardent, they're very enthusiastic, very passionate, and they decide, after having never been involved in politics before, that they want to run for Congress. And this is not just politically unsophisticated people that are new to the process. Sometimes they're rich people, business people who decide, I'm going to get involved in politics. My first race, I'm going to run for the United States Senate. I'm going to run for governor. And a lot of times, once in a blue moon, as is the case with Donald Trump, it works, but it almost never works. And so one of the things that this form does is help people sort of come back to earth and take a look at what they're dealing with, and maybe they think after filling out this form that maybe they shouldn't run for Congress, maybe they should start out at county commissioner or something like that, or PCO, which is fine to do. Another thing that this form helps them do is to sort of organize in their mind the beginning of a campaign plan, and you'll see what I mean as we get into this. This form, my greatest personal asset as a candidate is, okay, not their greatest personal asset as a father or as a human being, but as a candidate is. That might be you're a good public speaker. It might be that you have a few extra bucks you can throw at a campaign. It might be that you're well connected in town. But have people who fill this sheet out consider, what is your greatest personal asset as a candidate? My next two most important assets are, and then have them fill that out. This is really a good question to ask, because if you ask them to think about what they bring to the table as a candidate, then already that puts them on a track of thinking that they probably haven't been on before. My greatest personal weakness is, and my next two personal weaknesses are. And again, this is as a candidate. Maybe their their personal weakness as a candidate is that they have a skeleton in the closet. Maybe they had a reckless driving ticket 2 years ago that could be brought up. Maybe it's that they're not a very good public speaker. Maybe it's that they don't have time to knock on doors. Whatever it is, whatever their weaknesses are, have them put out. You've already, with these 4 questions, you've got them thinking, what are my strengths as a candidate? What are my weaknesses as a candidate? These things in my background will be campaign assets. These things in my background may be campaign liabilities. If you're running for school board and you've volunteered for schools before, you've been a member of the PTA or something like that, that's good. It's important that people think in these terms. What in their background will be campaign assets? Not what qualifies them to do the job if they get elected, but what in their background will make them a good candidate. Because you don't get to govern unless you win. And the questions about how am I qualified to govern is a very important question. And if you're not qualified to govern, you shouldn't govern. But you need to ask, what are my greatest assets and liabilities as a candidate? Beyond what I can personally control, these 2 factors are prime assets. There are things in a campaign that you can control, excuse me, and things you can't control. One of the things you might not be able to control is the makeup of the voter registration base. Okay, now I understand that this is a Republican county. Is that true, that there are more registered Republicans than registered Democrats in this county, right? Okay, that's an example. Beyond what I can personally control, these 2 factors are prime assets. Okay, it might be that this is a community that has an agricultural base around it. If, depending on what you're running for, if you're running for a soil and water conservation seat, that could be an asset. That's something beyond your control. That could be an asset. Beyond what I can personally control, these 2 factors are my prime liabilities. These are things to be overcome. Okay, for example, you're running for office, your opponent is an incumbent. The incumbent probably has connections of people who will endorse them, and you may not have those connections. That's something that isn't in your control. That can change over time as you build connections and get people who will endorse you, but that's an example of something you can't control, a pre-existing network that is leveraged by your political opponent. So you see what you're doing here. Already with these questions, what are my greatest personal assets and weaknesses as a candidate? What in your background will work against your being elected, will work for your being elected? What things about the political landscape in your race beyond your control will work to your advantage and will work to your disadvantage? Number 9, here are 5 people who will help me get elected. Here you write down specific names of people who will help you get elected. Sometimes you run for office and you find you're unopposed. You win. Congratulations. And you'll be surprised how often that does happen. Sometimes you'll run for office and you'll have 1 opponent or 2 opponents, and nobody does any campaigning, nobody spends any money, and you win. God bless you. Sometimes you lose. But most of the time, if you have a contested campaign, somebody's going to try to get elected, try to win, and you will try to win too. So, who are 5 people who will help you get elected? Then number 10, here are 5 people who will work to see me defeated. What enemies do you have? What opponents do you have? If you're running for a school board that's full of 4 liberals and 1 open seat, you can bet that those 4 liberals might be among those who would work to see you defeated. It can work in your favor, but see, that's what this spreadsheet is about. Okay? That's what this spreadsheet is about. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I've argued in the past, if a board was dominated by liberals and there was 1 open seat, I would argue publicly that somebody who is a limited government proponent should be in that seat for the sake of political diversity. And I go to the liberals and I say, you all believe in diversity, don't you? Right? Then why would you want all of you to think the same way? If you got 4 people that agree on one thing, it is the responsibility of the 5th person to disagree, to provide an alternate viewpoint, to make sure that people check themselves, that they're not too sure of themselves. So that's an example of how that can work in your favor. And that's the point of this sheet. I was going to say spreadsheet, but that's the point of this sheet, is to get people to look introspectively at themselves as a candidate, to look at the environment in which they are running for office, and look at what their opposition is like, and get an idea of what they would have to do to win. Number 11, here are 3 primary issues I will advocate. A, here is the basic strength of each issue, and B, here is a basic weakness of this issue. Okay, so if you want to close the local water slide because it loses money and it's something that the private sector could do better, and that's a real problem in Hillsboro, Oregon. They used taxpayer money to build a water slide, didn't make money. Right? Why is the government, I don't see anywhere in the Constitution where the government's supposed to make a water slide. Right? Yeah, it's like a zombie. It keeps coming back from the dead. But you know, if you were to have a position, I want to sell the water slide to a private provider and get the city out of the water slide business. Think about what's the basic strength of an issue. Could be fiscal responsibility. A major weakness is that you'll have opponents that'll say, but how will the children have a water slide? And there'll be a political cost to that. But anyway,
It's been my experience that anytime somebody can't win the argument with you in any other way, they bring up kids.
that's right. Yes, you don't hate children, do you? That's right. What about our children? And that's what I want people to look at. Here are 3 primary issues I will advocate. Here is a basic strength of each issue. Here is a basic weakness of each issue. And any candidate for local office, national office, statewide office should be able to ask themselves those questions and answer those questions. Then 12, I will not do the following things, even if doing them will cost me the election. This is where your cardinal principles are. You know, I will not do these things. 1, lie, misrepresent, cover up, whatever it is. Take a position against something that you believe ardently in. Okay? This is where people sort of think to themselves about what their cardinal principles are and what they will not violate, even if it means losing the election. You see that this is not an easy spreadsheet, or this is not an easy questionnaire to fill out honestly. It requires some deep introspective thought. But the candidates that answer these questions are going to have a really good idea of what kind of office they could realistically expect to win, how they would win it, how they would conduct their campaign, who would help them, who would work against them, what the central principles of the campaign would be. And there will be central principles, whether you're running for a vector control board or state government, and what your core principles are. If you know these things and do the other things that were discussed earlier in this training, you've got somebody who is going to be very, very difficult to beat in a race. Okay, so that concludes this training on assessing yourself as a candidate. Are there any questions before we go on to something else? I see some people talking. Humana. Yes. I'm sorry? Susan, what she meant? This is all the cord I've got.
I'll come over there.
Okay, and one more time. What is your name, ma'am? Susan, and you served on a school board in town. Yes.
So when I decided to run for school board, the incumbent that I was running against and other members of the school board were out promoting, that we really needed to keep my opponent in office because blah, blah, blah. And, it kind of fell on deaf ears or jaded ears that said, yeah, right. Because people weren't necessarily happy with the way that the school board was going. I mean, I, for one, wasn't happy with it. And so, it worked in my advantage. I didn't win by a large margin. I think it was 32 votes, but I did win. And within a very short time, the other school directors went, wow, Susan is a real asset to our board. And yeah, we weren't doing the rubber stamp thing. In fact, my first question to them after I was elected was, so do any of you know Robert's Rules of Order? The meetings are now run by Robert's Rules, and they go much more efficiently. So, but, that was, after sitting in the meetings all summer, I was like, oh my God. I did get an idea what the issues were and, some of the hurdles that we had to jump over. The state regulations on schools is ridiculous. There is no local control on schools. And what we had when I joined the board is now gone. The McCleary fixed that. No more local control. Forget it. So, but anyway, I could go on and on.
Well, that's okay. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Freeman, for running and winning and serving. And this candidate assessment guide, do you think this is a helpful document for folks? That's good. All right. Good. Yep.
It's a whole lot of static and not a lot of affirmations. People are complaining about the school board all the time.
That's true.
Complaints are unwarranted.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure that your microphone is on.
It's not.
The microphone's not on?
No, it's very, I mean, I could hear if I was really paying attention, but it's not.
The microphone's not working.
Microphones for the cameras. We don't have speakers to broadcast it. So
It's for the recording. That's right. Yeah.
All right.
Otherwise, in a kind of this sort of environment, to be able to pick it up from this location would be difficult. So that's why the speaker. So
Yeah.
it does not project any. We're not using these speakers.
Well, then my ears weren't fooling me. I know I'm a very good listener because if you're married, you've got to be.
That's right.
Picked up on everything.
You want to live long.
Well, thanks for pointing that out on camera. Hopefully you can edit that out.
That can be edited out. I'm taking audio recording here on my phone too, so one way or the other it'll get picked up. That's right. Okay, now this I'm going to do next. This is how to be effective in informal debates. Most of the people who run for local nonpartisan office will not be asked to a formal debate. Now there are exceptions. Sometimes there are debates for school board candidates and city council candidates. But most of the time for the park and rec positions and so on, you might get a forum, but you won't get a full-on debate. Where you will get debates is when you get into discussions with constituents, or maybe you'll be interviewed on the radio, or maybe you'll be interviewed by a newspaper reporter. These are the kind of discussions that I'm talking about, something that is informal and that is unstructured, where you get into a discussion. This could even go as far as family life. You know, when the son or daughter wants to borrow the car keys and you're kind of thinking that might not be such a good idea, you get into an informal debate. So what I'm about to teach you here is very important for candidates running for local office, and it's very important for people who serve in office, but it's also good for family life and friendships and any kind of relationship you might have in the community. And the first thing that I teach people is, when you're about to enter into a debate or a discussion, identify who your audience is. I've seen a lot of candidates for local office get interviewed on the radio thinking that they want to convince the interviewer that they're right or that they're the best. And that's a mistake, because the audience is not the radio interviewer. The audience are the listeners. When you're talking to a reporter, you'd love to convince the reporter, but your audience is not the reporter. The audience are the people who will read the article. So you're going to want to conduct your discussion in a manner that is going to shape how that reporter writes the story. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. We'll talk about media in a little bit. Yes, Ken?
Yeah, the case in point would be Donald Trump. The media does not understand Trump at all. Trump's speaking past them. Ronald Reagan did the same thing. What he did was he bought time on national networks and spoke past the media.
Yep.
And they called him the Teflon president. They couldn't touch him. And so it's important to realize who you're talking to, who you're really trying to convince.
Yep. Donald Trump's a master of that. He knows that the audience are the people who are watching the news shows, reading the Twitters, all of those things. He doesn't care about impressing or convincing or persuading the reporters. And that's a good lesson for every candidate. Naturally, you want to deal with the reporters professionally, and if you can convince them, you know, God bless you. But that's not who your audience is. I've even seen actually, I've been in a situation myself when I ran for governor out in Vail, Oregon. I was in a discussion with someone sitting at a lunch counter, and about a minute or two into the discussion, I looked around, I realized there were 6 or 7 people that were listening to the discussion. And I realized at that point that my audience wasn't the person I was talking to anymore, it was the people who were listening. Okay, so before you get into a debate or when you get into a discussion, get yourself into the habit of saying, who is my audience here? That's what's really important, and that's how you should start every discussion, where the audience is somebody other than just the person you're talking to. Okay? 2, always be nice, no matter what. People are emotional beings. There are some who are rational beings, and most of us are a mix of emotional and rational beings. But if someone is being a jerk, or if someone has lost control of themselves, we tend not to like them. And as much as people are convinced by the logic around certain arguments, they're oftentimes convinced by who the nice person is, who the reasonable person is. Even in small claims court, the loser is usually whoever the judge perceives to be the jerk, even if the facts go the other way. So always be nice. I've seen situations, and maybe you've seen this at a Thanksgiving Day discussion with your family members, where people will get into an argument and then they would say, how could you be so stupid? How could you be so blind? Don't you see what's going on around you? How many people have seen that happen in a discussion or a debate? Everybody. Okay? It happens all the time. And I've been guilty of that myself in the past. My guess is many of you have been guilty of that in the past as well. So the point here is, always be nice, no matter what. Always be calm. If the person on the other side loses their cool, they're going to lose the debate. Right? Stay cool. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that held true with Trump?
Do I think that holds true with Trump? Sometimes, yeah. I think in general it does. Now, there's really only one Donald Trump. I'm not Donald Trump. and there aren't very many people out there that can sense the media and do things the way he can. But he sometimes comes off as the jerk, and the way he pulls that off sometimes is making the other side look like more of a jerk. The way he beats up the media, for example. But in our case, when you're running for president and it's high-powered hardball politics, that's one thing. But when you're running for fire and rescue, you don't want to be seen as a jerk, because you're dealing with a community level issue with neighborhood people, and they want to like the people that they vote for in their town. So it's important that when you run for office and you get into discussions, that if you have, passionate disagreements with people, that you don't let it get the better of you. Let the other person lose their cool. Let them be the one that folks see as kind of the jerk. And one thing you can do to be gracious is, if you see that tempers are starting to get hot, you can say something like, something, I really respect what you're saying, and I know we're getting a little passionate here. So why don't we just take a pause and, come back in a week and talk about this some more? You look like the reasoned one. You look like the thoughtful one, the one that's going to keep it together in the midst of passion, right? And people vote for folks like that. So always be nice, no matter what. Always be nice. Did you have a comment? I thought somebody did. Yeah, Ken.
Just a quick comment. The subject Donald Trump came up. He's by no means the perfect candidate or the perfect person. And I think kind of the lesson I draw from that is that you don't have to be perfect to run for office. The better that you can become being a good candidate, hooray.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think, this candidate that I'm supporting is not perfect, we need to develop each other, is what I'm saying, and be the sounding board for each other. But don't let it keep you from running for office if you think you're not perfect or your candidate's not perfect.
That's right.
Trump is an example of that. There's a lot of places he could improve. It's kind of amazing he's president. In my view, I was supporting a different candidate when it all happened.
Yeah.
But don't let it stop you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm providing a lot of training saying that if you're going to run for office, do this, do that, you should do this, you should do that, you should not do this, and so on and so forth. That can easily lead somebody to believe, wow, I have to be almost perfect to run for office, and that's not true. I don't know a single person who has mastered all of the skills that I'm talking about, including myself. And it's about always improving yourself. But if you strive to improve yourself in all of these areas, and if you're willing to do that, you've got the right temperament to run for office anyway. You're the kind of person that people will trust, that wants to improve themselves, wants to do the right thing, that isn't just running for their own ego gratification. And if you're that kind of a person, please run for office. People will tolerate mistakes. In the long run, in the big picture, people will be very forgiving of mistakes made in good faith by people who want to do right than by people who make mistakes who are clearly out for themselves. Yes, ma'am.
It was unique, or is unique, to all of elections, because I think the picture is like the enemy was the establishment and the deep state or whatever, and everybody kind of knew that you needed like a bull to go through the china shop.
Yeah.
And that's why it worked for him. I mean, instead of being nice, because there'd been a lot of polite, nice people that had tried it.
That's being the right kind of person at the right place at the right time.
Well, my experience with Trump is that everything's a fine line. I mean, all of these things even are a fine line. And it's funny, when we talk about him, I can think about just our local elections and how these techniques were used and how the balance is really, it's hard to walk. I can think of a candidate who would always lose her temper, and then her opponent baiting her and making himself look bad because he was baiting her, knowing that that was her weakness, and the way that that played off of each other. And I think that all of these things you can go a little bit overboard on, even being too nice.
Yeah.
I can think of a candidate that we had that was too nice, that should have come in and been a little bit more combative in areas. And you know, I think that that's important when you're thinking about these things, is the balance there of how you can walk those lines.
Now, at the local level, you know, when people are running for governor or president or Congress, it's hardball politics. At the local level, if you use those kind of tactics, it's usually not well received. Like when they spent $12,000 slamming me for a water board race. Everyone had a visceral reaction against it. Okay? So, with regard to being too nice, I think that's a point that merits a little bit of discussion. Tone is everything. If you're being treated badly or you're being challenged, tone is everything. You can be nice and be tough at the same time. Instead of saying, "You're a liar, you mischaracterized my record, you mischaracterized what I did, and that's unethical, and you shouldn't even be running for office," right? You could be absolutely right, but in a lot of people's minds, you've lost. But you can say, you know, I understand that you're very competitive and you're very tough in this race, but you've mischaracterized my position completely. And the facts completely support what I've been saying. I've been able to provide this documentation, and I will stand to any challenge to what I've said. Okay? Just as tough, twice as nice. And that's something that people will accept at a local, nonpartisan level. Yes, Ken?
Ronald Reagan was such a genius at turning the argument around because he used wit and humor.
Mm-hmm.
He was always telling jokes about the Soviet Union. As a matter of fact, but if you want to study someone who was a master, study Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
Reagan was just masterful at that.
He was, and that's a good person to teach. And that's why I say, if you really want to learn some of these techniques, do study the speeches of famous people you admire, but also go to Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a great resource. The next thing, and this makes it easier to be nice. Remember that your opponent is not your enemy. Okay? Now, there are people out there at a very high level who, in my personal opinion, are evil. People who want to use power to control our lives. I think that that's evil. And there are people out there like that. But generally speaking, particularly at the local level, people who support big government, they're not that way. They really believe that government is a potential force for good and that people's lives can be improved by more government. They're misguided. They're wrong. But they're not evil. You know, some of them at the very top level might be, but most of the ones at the local level are not evil. Misguided, but not evil. I used to live next to Democrats, and we would argue about things all the time, but they weren't bad people. They mowed their lawn. They did their jobs. They took care of their kids. And when one of us was out of town, we'd watch each other's houses. These were not evil people. Ding-dongs, but not evil people, right? And I wouldn't call them ding-dongs because that wouldn't be nice, right? But if you can remember that your opponent running against you for Soil and Water Commission, if you can remember that they're not evil, and even though they're your opponent, they are not your enemy, that is a tool which will help you continue to be nice. You see? And for people who lose their temper, like the person that you mentioned, this is something to tell them. To say, look, this person running against you for what position was that? A school board race or something? Okay, so some race. You can say, look, all right, I want you to calm down and hold your temper. Yes, they're a ding-dong, but they're not Satan. All right? They're not Satan. They're not out to snuff the soul out of you, okay? So remember that. They're misguided, but they're not evil, and use that as a tool to be nice. Yes?
We had a particular candidate candidate this year that previously, before the elections, before that person became a part of the election, this person posted a lot
Now, who specifically do you mean?
a lot of really negative stuff on Facebook, especially about abortion and brainwashing and stuff like that. And as soon as this person decided to run for office,
Came back to
cleaned
Hollywood.
up their Facebook.
Deleted
Completely.
things and, yeah.
But the sad part of that truth is that everybody read it before it was deleted. So, you know,
Be nice.
you have to be honest with what you say your reasons are for running for office.
And what you're talking about harkens to what this gentleman referred to before, the authenticity. Be authentic to who you are. And if there are things you've done or said in the past that are going to cause you to take some hits, just be prepared to absorb the hits and find a way. Those are skeletons in your closet. The Facebook posts that this person made that were vile and nasty, that's a skeleton in her closet, and she probably needed to come up with some reasonable explanation as to why she did that. And it might have been something as simple as, something, when you run for office, you look at things differently, and I realized that I shouldn't have said the things that I said before, and I regret saying them. Now, if this person had taken that approach, there would be some people who would have responded favorably to that. Not everybody. Yeah, that's right.
That's what Donald Trump did. Exactly.
After the Access Hollywood thing?
Like it was locked room this or that, and let's move on. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. Some people will accept it, but others won't.
But, yeah.
But again, look at the skeletons in your closet, come up with a reasonable reaction to them if they come out, be authentic, and always be nice, and remember that your opponent is not your enemy. You don't have to know everything. A lot of new candidates for office, particularly ones that have never run before, believe that they have to have an answer for every question that they're given. And so rather than say, I don't know, they will try to BS or jaw their way through it or ramble on, try to buy themselves time to think of a good answer. It's not a good idea. If you are asked a question by a reporter or by a constituent or by your challenger and you don't know the answer, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is to say, something, that brings up an interesting point, and there are aspects of that I haven't thought of before. I'd like to give you a thoughtful response. Let's come back in a couple of days or a day or two. I'll give you a thoughtful answer to that issue or a thoughtful response to that issue. Most of the time, that'll work. Once in a while, it won't. But in those situations where it doesn't work and it makes you look like you're ignorant of an important issue, for example, Gary Johnson's famous Aleppo moment, during the presidential campaign last year. If you acknowledge that you don't know, but you want to think about it and come back, you will at least let everyone see that you are a thoughtful person, that you are not a liar, that you are not a BSer. This speaks to your integrity. And even if it causes you to lose a battle today, it will equip you to win the battle tomorrow because you will have done something to enhance your reputation. Most of the time, people will be especially at the local level, people will be very forgiving about that. And if you say, I don't know, but I want to come back with something reasonable, most people who are operating in good faith will give you that chance. And if you come up with a good response, then you're gold. You've come off as somebody who is a thoughtful person. But the worst thing you can do that undermines authenticity, right, and that makes you look like just another political operative, maybe at a more local level, is if you try to stammer around for an answer when you don't know. So it's okay not to know the answer to a question when you're running for an office. Just handle it well. Handle it saying, I don't know the answer to that. It's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of it that way before. I will think about this and come out with an answer in the next couple of days. And then make darn sure that you come out with an answer in the next couple of days. Any questions on that? Yeah, Ken.
Just a quick thought on that. I think it's important to study the office you want to run, be informed What kind of decisions do they make? What kind of issues are they faced with? And then, if someone hits you, like, well, what do you think about, pro-abortion or anti-abortion, whatever? Well, that's really not pertinent to the office.
Yes.
This is not a decision that I'm going to be faced with. Now, this is what I believe, but, go on, but be prepared so that you don't get blindsided.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
It does make a difference whether it's going to be a board position or like an office. So the difference between sitting on the school board and being, say, the treasurer, because the treasurer is the manager of that department.
Right.
Management decisions for that department, whereas on a school board, I'm one of 5 people.
Yeah.
And I always just said, I'll be one of 5 people making those decisions.
Right.
I will certainly bring this issue to the debate.
Yes, and that's a good response too. You've done that. It's a reasonable response to a question that you might not know the answer to. That's good. And another thing you can say is, what my basic philosophy is? Try the limited government answers first, and then look to government answers if none can be found. Knowing that political philosophy, this is how we'll approach any issue. Ones that I'm familiar with now or ones that may come up before us in the future. Look for common ground. Now, by this, I don't mean what most people mean. When you hear people say, look for common ground, what they're talking about is compromise. Okay, if you want 10 and the other person wants 20, find common ground by maybe meeting at 15. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about common ground, I'm saying when you're in a debate, find what the result is that you both agree on. What is the result? For example, if you're running for a school position, okay, you can talk about, school choice is a good issue, okay? If you've got somebody who wants everyone to be in the public schools without exception, and you want there to be school choices, an example of what common ground is would be, look, what we both want is to make sure that all children are able to get a quality education, right? And that they'll be prepared to function in the world. That's the goal. Do you agree that this is the goal? And if they agree, you have found that common ground. Then the contest becomes which system is better able to achieve that goal. Then you've got a metric. Because if you're in a debate, there's going to be a winner and a loser. And you want there to be a standard that the audience can use to determine who has won and who has lost. And one way you can do that in an informal debate is to find a common goal that two systems are competing to achieve. That's the common ground. Okay, if it's fire and rescue, maybe there's going to be a voluntary fire department, or we need a professional fire department, or a private fire department like they have in Stockdale, Arizona. Whatever it is, the common goal is we want to make sure that fires are prevented, and where they can't be prevented, they're put out quickly, and that lives are saved and property is saved, right? Okay, once you've got that right, you've got common ground. Now the issue is, which system is best able to control fires? Okay, so give the audience a metric to use to determine who has won or lost a debate by engaging your opponent and coming up with something in common that you both want to achieve, and then show that your way of achieving that goal is the best. Okay?
They call that framing the issue.
Which I talk about more, that's exactly true, which I talk about more explicitly on the back page. Frame the discussion by establishing values. Now, my poor wife has heard me say this 100 times, and I hate to be repetitive even to my wife, but I like to use the example of a debate. Resolved, is candy good? Okay, and you've got one person over here, the president of the American Dental Association. The president of the American Dental Association. He gets up there and he says, no, candy is not good. Yeah, I know it tastes great, but it causes cavities, it causes gum disease, it causes diabetes, and that causes all kinds of problems, kidney damage, so on and so forth. If you're going to decide this debate, the primary value should be health. Health is the basis upon which you should decide whether candy is good or not. Okay? And over here on the other side, you've got the president of Hershey Incorporated. And he says, I know that, in excess, candy causes health problems. I'm not talking about excess, but candy makes children smile. It's used in romance and courtship. It makes people happy. It tastes good. So life is for living. So be happy. Happiness is the value that you should base this debate on. So you've got one person trying to frame the debate in terms of happiness, another person trying to frame the debate in terms of health. Whichever one prevails in the minds of the audience, that's probably the one that's going to win the debate. Okay, so when you get into a discussion, like Johnny wants to borrow the car keys, the Johnny says, I'm young, I need to get out with my friends and develop socially, and I need to, have some fun. It's an important part of growing up. So freedom and development and growth is the argument. And the parent says, I don't know, I don't trust you to drive at night. You were 3 hours late last time. Security and safety is the value. So what I'm trying to say there is when you get into a debate, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about taxes, whether it's about education, whatever it is, think about the core value that you are trying to advance. It might be educational freedom. It might be prosperity. It might be any of those things. Think about what the value is. If you know what the fundamental value is underlying the things that you are trying to do, you will have a more confident position from which to engage in the debate, and you will be more likely to win. And you can even come out and say, we've agreed, my opponent and I have agreed that the best educational system is the one that can prepare the most kids to function well in the world. We've already agreed on that. But beyond that, I believe in freedom. Freedom is the centerpiece of my support for school choice. School choice can prepare children better than the public school can because our schools should be as diverse as our children are. Okay? The public school system can't offer that because their system is not based on freedom. Their system is based on compliance and conformity. So what you've got there is you've got a common goal that you've agreed to with your opponent. Then you hold your system up as the best one, and then you show what it is grounded in. Educational freedom. That's compelling. Okay, now, at the local level, most people won't do this. Think about what you've done. You've identified who your audience is. You've adopted a demeanor of pleasantness, and you're always nice. You keep your cool. You realize that your opponent isn't your enemy, so you've got some grace. You're not a know-it-all. You don't have to know everything. And when you don't know something, you admit it. You've looked for a common objective, something that everybody wants to achieve. You've shown your system as the one that can best accomplish that goal. You've framed the discussion with a core value. You realize that this is all before you even talk about what the issue is. You realize how powerful this is. At the local level, almost nobody does this. I've seen a bunch of candidates for fire and rescue boards, park and rec boards, water boards, give speeches about things, and what they talk about are projects they want to do or things they want to see. They don't talk, thank you, they don't talk in terms of large goals, fundamental values, and so forth. So if you do that, you're going to have a tremendous edge over whoever your opponent is. Number 7, put your best arguments first. This is not baseball. In baseball, the manager will give a card showing what order everyone's going to bat in, and what they try to do is have some decent hitters get on first base, second base, third base, and then the fourth one is the cleanup batter. You're hoping that they'll hit a home run, and that you'll get 4 runs instead of just 1. Okay, that's the baseball strategy. But it doesn't work in media. Okay? If you take your biggest argument and you save it for last, that's called burying the lead. In a newspaper article, most people only read the first paragraph. There are people who read the whole article, but most people read only the first paragraph. If you put your best argument last, it's going to be buried in the 4th or 5th paragraph, and a lot of people are never going to read it. If you're on the radio at noon, and you've got 4 or 5 points you want to make during an interview, a lot of people who are in the car at noon for lunchtime maybe might arrive at their restaurant and turn the car off by the time you get to your main point. So when you're dealing with these kind of debates, I mean, we've lost a little bit of audience here today already. That's why I wanted to put assessment of candidates first, because if people had to leave early, I wanted to make sure that they got that first. I wanted to make sure that they got this second. Put your best argument first. Put your next argument second. Put your third argument third. Do not bury the lead, and you will be much more impactful. Okay? And even in structured debates that last an hour in front of like a local organization, people's eyes will start to glaze over after about a half an hour. Hit them with your best argument first.
Quick question.
Yes.
Reagan was really good at that. He had basically I've been told he had like 3 things, and he would always talk about those 3 things. And the press complained saying, you only talk about these 3. He kept on target. He kept his message clean and consistent.
Yep. Decide what you want to say. That's usually no more than 3 points, and hit them over and over again. Then finally, no matter what the debate has spiraled into or what it has become, thank your opponent. Thank your audience for their attention. If you're on the radio, excuse me, if you're on the radio, say, well, John, I want to thank you for interviewing me today, and I also want to thank your audience for listening to what I have to say. It looks gracious. It's classy. People want to vote for gracious and classy people. If you're in an argument with somebody, just say, you know something, I know that we haven't agreed today, but I really enjoyed listening to what you have to say. I really like the way you challenged me, and I want to thank you for debating me today. Okay? Yeah, but the people around that might be listening to you are going to say, that's a classy person. And you'll probably win, because in most people's minds, they will vote for the people they like, not necessarily the person that's right. We see that all the time. Doesn't that just make you crazy? Makes me crazy. But it's a fact. Most of the time, people will vote for the person they like more than the person who they think agrees with them on the articles. You know, when Ronald Reagan was elected, most people didn't agree with him. Only about 40% of Americans agreed with his positions on the issues. But he won. Why? Because they liked him. They didn't like Carter. Right? They didn't like Carter. Most Americans actually agreed more with Carter than Reagan based on polling at that time. But they didn't like Carter. And they didn't like John Anderson. I supported John Anderson that year. I was a junior in high school. Yeah, I guess I was always destined for third-party stardom, right? But they voted for Reagan because they liked him. And the first vote that I cast in my life, when I was old enough in 1984, was actually for Ronald Reagan. And they liked him better than they liked Walter Mondale. Right? Okay? He told the best jokes. That's right. And that's how it is. Now, at the local level, you know, we've got 50-year master plans. We've got capital construction plans in the water district that I served on. We've got all these different aspects, water rate formulas, cost of service formulas, and you know, you needed to debate about all of those things. But the average local voter that lives in the neighborhood and has a dog and 2 kids, they don't go over that stuff. Most of the time, they will vote for the person that they like. So be nice all the time. Know that your opponent isn't your enemy. Find a common objective. Show that your system is the best. You know, respect what the other person says, but shows that your person is the best. Thank them when you're done. And people will like you. And if they like you, and they'll vote for you, and being right on the issues, well, that's helpful too. That's the cherry on top. It should be the sundae, but it's the cherry. And if you know that, you'll win.
That you work with, are a lot of them able to overcome the temper issue? Because that does put someone in a very bad light.
Yeah. If they're serious, they will overcome the temper issue. The question there is, why are you running? Now, almost everyone will say, I'm running because I want a better America. And they'll say this on the left as well as the right. Okay? But sometimes that's not what's really at the heart of why they're running. Sometimes people run for the purpose of affirming their own belief systems, for receiving validation. Sometimes it's vanity, sometimes it's ego. People who run for those reasons don't overcome the temper because it's like a drug and they get off on it. Okay? But the ones who are serious and want to be good public servants and want to be successful and want to win, they are almost always able to overcome their temper and watch themselves. So I don't know if that helps, but that's what I've observed. Yes.
Points to the whole issue of getting good candidates, finding
Yes.
good people, encouraging them, saying, hey, we got your back.
Yeah.
Let's go for it. And
Yeah.
finding good candidates. We in Thurston County, the Republicans put up exactly 0 candidates for local office. 0. They didn't field a single candidate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, Western Liberty Network is not a partisan organization, so I can't speak to Republicans, Democrats. I'm guessing Libertarians didn't run anyone, and the Constitution Party didn't run anyone.
Actually, Libertarian did run.
Did they run one?
Yeah, but that's the only.
But I got to make that really clear. But that's a fact. Is I'd rather have a hothead, limited government advocate than somebody who's calm, cool, collected, who loves government, who's a government technocrat. But we usually don't have that choice. If you want to maximize your chances to win, watch your temper. It's as simple as that. And I think most reasonable people will know that. And by studying these things, it makes it easier to overcome the temper if you think about them and incorporate them into your thought processes. I advise people to take these things home, and when they're laying in bed at night before they go to sleep, instead of reading World War Z or Tom Clancy or whatever they like, read this thing and think about it, how it applies to your life, and think about examples of where you've been in situations like this. If you do this 2 or 3 times, you'll start to have little red lights go off in your head. Uh-oh, don't lose your temper here. And you'll be able to check yourself. And other people who might have temper issues would be able to check themselves too. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? Now, before I go to the next one, which is one of my favorite ones, I'm going to point out I've got a blank envelope here. These trainings are always free, but they're expensive to put on. And so if you see value in what you hear today, I'd like to ask you to put a contribution in here that will help cover things like hotel and gas and all of that sort of thing. Western Liberty Network operates on a shoestring, and we love what we're doing, and we want to keep on doing it. So if you see value in what you hear today, I encourage you to put a few bucks in the envelope and make a contribution. If you want a receipt, it is tax deductible as a 501c3 organization. There, I did my commercial. How's that? Okay. Next training I have is dealing with the media, do's and don'ts. If you're running for local office, you will probably be interviewed by the local newspaper, maybe the local radio station, maybe more than that. Neighborhood newsletters or whatever it is. And if they're not coming to you, you should go to them and make them aware that you're running for office, why your office is important, and why the paper should let people know about the office that you're running for. And of course, limited government activists have a troubled relationship with a lot of the media out there. Because a lot of the media out there is either legitimately or perceived to be biased, that they tend to be more liberal, more in favor of government. And limited government activists don't always know how to deal with that. And that's what this training is about. Now, we're fortunate in that we're in a relatively small community, And what's the name of the paper here? The Moses Lake Columbia Basin Herald. And what area does it cover? About 50-mile radius or 100-mile radius? Mm-hmm. Yep. And but it's not like the Seattle Times. It's not like the LA Times. And that's important. Before I met the woman who is perfectly suited for me over there, I was married to somebody who was a newspaper reporter. And I learned a lot about the media from that person. And one of the things is that when they come out of journalism school, they're young, they're idealistic, they think they're going to be the next Woodward and Bernstein, or that's what they aspire to. A lot of them are liberal. And when they finally get a job, if they're able to get a job, they're overworked and they're underpaid. They're typically given 4, 5 stories. They have a deadline. They've got an editor that they have to please. They're under a lot of pressure. And that's why a lot of them don't stay in the industry very long. Small newspapers, you'll notice that there's a lot of turnover with reporters. And with the exception of a grizzled person that's been there for a very long time, most of those reporters tend to be very young. And they tend to turn over a lot. And you will take a look at places that are higher in profile, like CNBC, C-SPAN. A lot of the New York Times reporters, LA Times reporters, they are very liberal. And they have an agenda. And they've got an important force, their newspaper or their network, to push that agenda. They're making a lot of money. But that's not true at places like the Beaverton Valley Times. That's not true at places like that. They're liberal, but they really want only 2 things. One, they don't want to get fired. 2, they want to go home. They want their workday to end, and they want to go home. Okay? Yes, they're liberal on balance, although you'll be surprised from time to time. But they don't want to get fired, and they want to go home. So if you help them do these things, you'll become indispensable. If you're a person that they can come to get a source on 3 or 4 stories, and they can get their story in by a deadline, they're going to come to you first instead of try to go for somebody that can never get on the phone. Be accessible. And know that if you can help this person complete their stories, they're going to like you, even if you're not ideologically aligned with them. Even if you're not ideologically aligned with them, they're going to be dependent on you to help them get their stories done in time to meet their deadline. They also don't want to get fired. In one case, a reporter was covering a pumpkin festival. And it was a bad day. It was raining. The attendance was poor. Kids were crying. A lot of things went wrong. And the reporter covered it all very truthfully, handed the story into the editor. And the editor said, I can't publish this. If I publish this, I'm going to have to fire you. And he said, why? He said, because the sponsor of the Pumpkin Festival is one of our largest advertisers. Right? So the story was rewritten, selectively making pictures of a couple of laughing kids saying what a great success the Pumpkin Festival was. They don't want to get fired. Okay, and so to help them not get fired, help them make their deadline. Be accessible for them all the time and help them go home. They want nothing more than to get their 5 stories done in time and go home, relax, watch TV. So if you bear that in mind, if you're a local office holder and you say, who are the local reporters? Who's doing the political beat on the newspaper? Who is the assignment editor? Who is doing the news for the local radio station or whatever the outlets are? Find out who they are and learn a little bit about their job and what their responsibilities are, and simply help them do their job. And if you help them do their job, they are going to be much more receptive to you than if you're somebody that yells at them, which a lot of limited government activists do. They get mad at the whoever's doing the local paper. And that goes to number 2. Know who to talk to. Do not assume the editorial page department is connected to the news department. Oftentimes they're not. Remember that whoever writes the headline is not usually the same person that's writing the story. you might get a really deceptive headline. And I've heard people call and yell at the newspaper reporters, saying, "Why did you write this headline?" "I didn't write the headline." And if you complain about a reporter to the editor, you're going to put the reporter, at least in his or her mind, at risk of getting fired. So why would they come at you again for information, right? Help them not get fired. If they make a mistake, remember that what's obvious to you and me about a story or an issue may not be obvious to another reporter who has not been working on the issue we've been working on for a long time. They'll get names wrong. They'll get statistics wrong. A lot of times, limited government advocates will attribute that to malice, doing something on purpose to undermine what you're doing. Most of the time, it's not that at all. Most of the time, it's honest mistakes by a reporter that is not steeped in the issue the way that you are, and is overworked and probably confused you with somebody else. This happens all the time. So what I advise them to do is do not call that reporter's boss and complain about the reporter. If you do, the editor is going to see you as a problem. The editor is going to have to talk to the newspaper reporter. The reporter is going to see you as a problem. And even if you're right, you lose because they're not going to come to you for information in the future. Instead, call the reporter directly and say, "Hey, I want to thank you very much for covering this story, and I really enjoyed talking to you before. But I've got some information that I think will be helpful to you. I might not have been clear on some things. Would you like me to give you some, updated information?" This doesn't threaten the reporter. This doesn't put them at risk of getting fired. It lets them know that you are reasonable and you're not going to be a threat to them, and increases the likelihood that they will look to you to be a source in the future. Okay? Yes, Ken?
Yeah, there's an old saying, it goes something like this: don't criticize or attack someone who buys ink by the barrel.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Even if you're right, you lose because they have the control of the printing press or the microphone. So it's important to have a good relationship with them. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question?
Oh, I was just thinking that the Trump effect is more on that too, because one of our local medias had a horse and race for the PUD commissioners race for the build out of fiber because they're a fiber provider.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they kind of got a little snippy about this board member, supports fiber and this one doesn't, the fiber people lost.
Mm-hmm.
So Trump effect is interesting.
Yeah, the Trump relationship with the press has been instructive in a lot of ways, hasn't it? Yeah. When you send something to the media, make sure it is typed and looks professional. This seems like a no-brainer, but I have seen press releases given to the media that have been handwritten in pencil on paper. So if you communicate with the media at all, make sure you do it through press releases that are typed and look professional. I don't have time to do it today, but we do have training on how to write a good press release, and there's going to be a breakout on that at our conference that I'll tell you about before we leave today. Everyone in this place, if you are an active Tea Party activist or if you are an active limited government activist, get yourself some good photographs made. Get some 5x7 of you in front of a flag and you in front of a plain background. It's good to have these, and then digitize it, scan it, put it on a basic scanner, and send it. Find out who to send stock photos to the local newspaper or any of the newspapers in the area, and make sure that they have them on file. That increases the chances that if they do a story where you're quoted or a story about you, that they will use your photograph. And it's good to have that there. Be accessible. If you're dealing with the media, make sure they can reach you. If your phone rings, answer the call. Don't let it go to voicemail. If you have to have it go to voicemail, get to it quickly and return the call right away. Media, particularly television and radio, but also print, they deal with deadlines. And they will often quote the person that they can reach first. So if they're doing a story on a particular issue, whatever it is, make sure it's you that they talk to not the person who supports big government. Make sure that you're the one that's quoted. Make sure that you're the one whose photograph is in the paper. You can do that best if you are accessible and if you have had a nice picture of yourself made and that you have sent the picture to them. All you have to do is call the paper and say, who handles your stock photos? And they will tell you who it is, and they'll tell you what the email address is. And then you send an email to them saying, I am Joe Blow. I am an activist with the Grant County Tea Party, and attached to this email is my photo. Please put it in your stock collection. Thank you very much. Joe Blow. Example of a stock photo.
And one that's not.
Yeah, Ms. Freeman is passing around a phone that shows an example showing the difference between a good stock photo and a poor stock photo. And so, yeah, if that's another thing too. If you do not have a good stock photo of yourself and they want a photo of you, they're going to take a picture of you. And it might be with a phone, it might be in good light or poor light, but you're not going to be able to control your image, and it may not be an optimal image. So that's something you can control by making sure that they have a good stock photo of yourself. Get a professional portrait photo of yourself in front of an American flag and in front of a plain background. Digitize it, find out who handles stock photos for the newspapers you're going to be interacting with, and make sure they've got your pictures. Yes, Ken?
One of the things that one of the Tea Party groups in the Basin did was that they started an annual thing, like awards dinner type of thing, and I really I've come to appreciate the value of teamwork and building each other up and letting each other shine in our little corner of expertise. There was an individual that shot video for the group, and they awarded him, I think, Patriot of the Year or something like that. And this sort of thing sounds social to some people and all that, and maybe unnecessary, at least to some people think. But I think it's really necessary to pat each other on the back and let each other shine in the areas where you shine. And if we have a disagreement, we talk privately with the person, right? That's just courtesy. And it's just building the team is really, really important. And I look at the people around this table here, and I think, wow, what a marvelous group of people. I mean, this person has one expertise, and we all have our own, as they say, corner of expertise. And so take time out to recognize each other and appreciate that you're not alone in this, and appreciate that you're a really hugely important member of the bigger team.
Yep, that's actually true. And I will note that as I've interacted with some of you today and I watched, this is an excellent core group. And if you folks can work together, I think that there are a lot of great things that can be accomplished here with this group. And so I'm hoping that Ken and I and Natasha can be involved in facilitating that, offering training to your members as we go forward in time. Moving on, be patient with reporters. I touched on this before, but I'm going to read this because I think I say it better on paper than I might in an impromptu way. During an interview, reporters will sometimes mix up who you are, spell or pronounce your name incorrectly, get confused about which campaign or issue you're working on, or mess up other details. Remember that the reporter is probably covering 5 or 6 other stories, each with 2 or 3 people offering their views, many of whom he or she likely spoke with just hours or minutes before speaking with you. When reporters make mistakes, be patient, do not assume they are messing with you, and do your best to patiently and calmly correct them. If the mistake they make is insignificant, let it go. Remember, if you make their job easier, they will almost always treat you and your story with more professionalism and objectivity than if you don't treat them well. So I cannot stress that enough. As is the case with debates, don't mess with the facts. If you do not know the answer, do not try to BS your way through the interview. Tell them you don't know what the answer is, even if it's embarrassing, but tell them that you will get them an answer and you'll get it fast, and then do it in the manner in which you said. Don't make assumptions. about the political persuasions of the news departments or individual reporters you deal with. When I ran for governor on the Libertarian ticket in 1998, I did an interview in the city of the Dalles. The paper there was the Dalles Chronicle, and I was doing an interview figuring I was talking to another liberal. You know, he hadn't said anything. I just assumed it was a liberal. Found out he was a registered libertarian too. I was astonished. You know, most of the time, you know, you're going to be able to tell the angle from which somebody's coming at you for a story, but don't assume. Always leave open the possibility that even if you're not of the same basic ideology as the reporter, there may be issues that you can agree on, and you can build a relationship that is based on that.
In the political climate in which we are presently participating, there's a lot of mistrust of reporters because of whatever reason.
Yes.
But I for one, I'm pretty careful about what I say to a reporter because, first of all, I'm not really sure I know the answers, and second of all, I don't want to be misquoted. And so I always make sure that they dot their I's and cross their T's. Because,
Sure.
And if they don't, I'm probably going to let them know.
Well, you should let them know. How you do it is the key. Now, one way to avoid being misquoted is that when you know you have something to say, issue a press release. If you issue a press release, you can control the language of that press release. And a lot of times, remember, reporters want to go home, right? So a lot of times, they'll take things right off the press release. I've done press releases before and seen the press releases printed verbatim as newspaper articles in the past. And that Klamath Falls, that happened. Okay? Why? Because the reporter was busy and had a lot of stories and wanted to go home. But if you have a press release where you quote yourself and it's in writing, it's hard for them to misquote you, right? And if they call you, they're going to call you as a follow-up of having read your press release. And by giving them a written press release, they can still mess up the article, no question about it. But to a degree, you've boxed them in. You've given them a range of accuracy that if they stray beyond it, it's obviously wrong.
I had a reporter call me at the return of a significant event that happened in our political environment here in Grand County. And he asked me if I had a comment, and I said no. No. And he was like, he wanted me to make a comment, but I didn't feel comfortable making a comment.
Well, you should never make a comment if you're not comfortable making a comment. But I can tell you what happened. I can't guarantee it because I can't read anybody's mind, but I will almost guarantee you that person was working on a story, they were probably on a deadline, and they wanted to get a quote from somebody on the other side, and they were counting on you. And you didn't give them one. So he's probably thinking in his head, oh my gosh, who am I going to call now? Who else do I have that I can call that I can reach in the next 10 minutes and get a quote from? That's probably what was going on in their head.
I was even surprised that he even knew anything about what was going on at this particular time because we didn't either. No, I'm just kidding.
But listen, remember, if you are going to run for office, or you're going to help somebody run for office, you're going to have to deal with the media, even if you don't want to deal with the media. You're going to have to do it. So it's important to deal with the media in a way that increases the likelihood that you're going to get the coverage you want and decreases the likelihood that you're not going to get coverage you want. And one way you can do that is by issuing written press releases in advance to frame the discussions that will take place afterwards. It's hard to misquote a written press release, and it's hard to mischaracterize an interview based on the press release. So you can control a lot of it there. Be accessible, be patient, don't be coerced into saying something if you don't want to say something, but understand at the same time that the reporter is looking to you to help them go home and not get fired. If it was your son or daughter, and your son or daughter, you knew it was like, oh, I've got to get this done by 5 o'clock, and then if I get all my writing done by 10 o'clock, maybe I can get home by 11:30. You would like to help your son or daughter so they can get home at 9 and get a good night's sleep. and have something decent to eat, right? This is all that they want. And if you can give them that, they're going to say, you know something, she's conservative and I'm not, but I got to get my story done by 5, and they're a reliable source. I'll get a good quote. I'm calling her. This is how it really works. And if you know that, this is one of the ways that Donald Trump does manipulate the media. He knows what they want. He knows what they need. And that's why he says, CNN would be dead without me. Well, that's probably true. Right? CNN relies on him for ratings. The Russian collusion channel or whatever it is, right? Okay. You know, bear that in mind. If you understand this aspect of dealing with the media, it's power. This understanding is power. And it's power that increases the likelihood that you will get decent coverage even if the reporter and editorial board has a political orientation different than your own. Okay? Make sense? Yes.
So if the reporter calls and says, comment on this, you haven't even heard the news yet.
Yeah. Right. Well, if that happens, you can't give them a comment if you don't know anything. You can say something, boy, this came out in left field. I hadn't heard anything about this. I'd love to give you a comment.
I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I can get back to you, but I can't give you a comment until I've familiarized myself with this some more. But I would be happy to do it. Okay? Might be good enough for the reporter, but at least the reporter knows you're not messing with them. Yeah.
Yeah, as an example of not making assumptions about where the media is on something, I got a call from, I think it's called the Weekly Volcano, which is out of...
The Weekly Volcano.
Yeah, out of one of those lifestyle magazines. You know, not something I read. But I got a call. I was kind of apprehensive, and as I sat down with the guy, we talked for 2.5 hours. And he was shocked that it's early in the Tea Party. He was shocked that I wasn't.
I'm sorry, Ken.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'm going to have you go on here in a sec, but this gentleman has to leave.
Oh, okay.
But I wanted to ask everyone, on the table, you'll see sign-up sheets where you can put your email address and your name.
Yeah.
And I'd like to encourage everybody fill in one of these if you want to keep abreast of what is available through Western Liberty Network. Okay. So before he left, I didn't know he'd signed it already.
Yes, I did.
So.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No, that's fine.
nice to meet everyone here, and I look forward to seeing you guys again at some point.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, he can be the next Andy. He can be the Andy Taylor of Moses Lake. You know, I lived in Pratt, Kansas once, and there was a deputy, his population 6,000, and there was a deputy whose name was Barney, and he did have a firing mishap, so he was restricted to 1 bullet, which he had to keep in his pocket. Just like Barney Fife on the Andy Griffin Show. Yeah. I guess, or maybe they saw the Andy Griffin Show and said, this is how we can handle Barney.
What comes first, the egg or the bacon?
Yep. So you were saying, Ken?
So I sat down with this guy for 2.5 hours, as it turns out, at Sherry's restaurant, and he wrote a very glowing article, which was mostly his opinion. But when he found out that I wasn't who he thought I might be, all of a sudden he became really interested and had a great article. He said more things about me. It's funny, but yeah, don't assume. Don't assume.
Yep.
Assume the best, if anything.
Be a happy warrior.
Yes.
Right?
Reagan was a happy warrior.
Reagan was a happy warrior. So be a happy warrior. So anyway, if you bear this training in mind, you will be successful in the long run. You may have incidences where, the reporter is truly obnoxious and an idiot, in which case they're probably not going to be in the industry very long. But in the main, you will have good relationships with the media, even if you don't always agree, if you follow the training that's provided to you. Are there any other questions before we move on to our last training for the day? Okay, we'll go on.
I'd like to interject a little comment, but I may have to leave.
That's why I'm going to start talking faster, right?
Disregard the importance of local boards. They may be volunteer positions, but for instance, the Moses Lake Irrigation District Board hasn't had any challenges forever. If one person runs, they get elected,
What's that?
the community can exert their influence on local government by populating volunteer boards.
That's right. A lot of these positions go unchallenged. A lot of them are vacant even after the election. This is a way to get some credibility. If you ever want to run for anything larger, you know, let's say you want to run for state representative, when it says prior government experience, you don't have to put taxpayer. Okay? You don't have to put, you know, U.S. Army corporal, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's not relevant to elected office. You don't have to put, was a guest of the federal penal system for 5 years. You know, for government experience, you can put served as commissioner on the Moses Lake Irrigation Board, right? That's government experience. And that if you get enough of people in your Tea Party organization that have positions like that, you will develop a reputation as a place where local office holders are. And then it becomes the place to be. You will find that it'll be easier to get better speakers. You will find it'll be easier to get more people to join you because people join groups that do things. I was with Americans for Prosperity as the grassroots director for Oregon at the height of the Tea Party movement. I probably organized about a dozen Tea Party rallies that were over, 2,000-3,000 people. And I would watch these Tea Party rallies, and I would see people venting anger. They were upset, they were ticked off. But I looked at my boss, Jeff, and I said, this needs to be directed into something constructive or it's going to die. Because what we saw was people coming out to rallies. And then they come out to another rally. And then they come out to another rally. And it was about, liberals taking over and healthcare and all this other kind of stuff. But nothing was being done with that energy. It wasn't being channeled anywhere. And after 3 or 4 rallies, it wasn't fun anymore. The novelty wore off and people stopped coming to the rallies, right? And that was where I had the idea of Western Liberty Network, because if local groups run for local office, this is how they can take responsibility for their governance. They can take the offensive and take responsibility for their governance. And then when they win, the victory does not belong to an organization in Washington, D.C. or Olympia or Salem. It belongs to you. It's your organization. People join organizations that do things. Yep. And if your group doesn't do things, you're going to find that the membership will contract to where it becomes almost a social club, where people see each other and they know each other. If you do things, you will expand. You will attract new people. And one of the things that you can do is to run people for local nonpartisan office. Somebody can be the candidate. Someone can be the campaign manager. A few people can be volunteers. Your meetings can be about how to make these things work. You can coordinate things. You'll be seen as doing things. Some of you will lose, but some of you will get elected. And the ones that get elected will come to these meetings. Your group will have the reputation of being a place where local office holders are. So more people will want to come to contact them. Other office holders will come that wouldn't have come before. You'll get better speakers. You'll get more membership. And it feeds on itself constructively. Yes?
What do you do with what word do you use? Reputation, I guess, of a candidate that's a good candidate, and they've run more than once, and they gain, but nobody wants to see that candidate's name the third time, do they?
You're talking about a perennial candidate. Well, I ran 3 times before I finally won a seat on the Terra Linda Local School Committee, right?
Was it the same?
It was the same position. It was the same position. I ran 3 times. I won on my 3rd time. But if that's happening, have that person run for something smaller. Okay? I don't know what the range of positions are here in Moses Lake, but I encourage new people to run for the smallest office they can find if they're running for the first time. Okay? And if they've lost a few times running for a particular office, run for something smaller. Or get appointed to something. If your reputation is that of a perennial candidate and a perennial loser, then don't run for anything but volunteer for an appointed board. And then when you run for something in 2 or 4 years, you can say, was member of Moses Lake Planning Board, or whatever it was, and that's how you overcome the reputation.
Case in point, Sarah Palin. She got elected to Wasilla, I think, city council or something like that. And then she took on the issue of big oil companies, and she got appointed to the board. and so forth. So the ladder of success starts with the bottom rung.
And remember, Abraham Lincoln lost a bunch of elections before he finally got elected to Congress. Yeah, we're not all Abraham Lincoln, but okay. Now, what I'm going to talk about here, this is my last training of the day, are the components of a campaign plan. No matter what you run for, run a campaign. Whether you have opposition or not, run a campaign. If you have opposition, you're going to need to run a campaign to win. If you don't have opposition, running a campaign gives you and other members of your group practice. You get a free play. You're going to win anyway because you're running unopposed. You might as well run a campaign and learn how to run a campaign, because in the future you will have an opponent, or somebody will have an opponent. And in the meantime, you can use your unopposed campaign to give people experience in managing a campaign, building a campaign plan, a campaign calendar, working with the media, developing a list of volunteers, a list of donors, and all of those sorts of things. So run a campaign. But if you're going to run a campaign, run a campaign plan. And a campaign plan should be written, not in your head. I've heard people say, I've got a campaign plan, I know what I'm going to do. Well, where's your campaign plan? He goes, oh, it's in my head. Well, no. If it's not in your head, it's not a campaign plan. If it's not written down, it's not a campaign plan. Campaign plans are things that you can show donors that you want to invest in your campaign. Okay? If you're going to start a business, you're not going to go to a bank and say, I want to start a business. Oh, well, let's see your business plan. Oh, it's in my head. Right? Banks aren't going to give you money for that. Likewise, donors will be more likely to donate to your campaign committee if you have a campaign plan. Volunteers who will work for you will be more inspired and have more confidence in you as a candidate if you have a campaign plan. These are all very important things. They're things you can share with other candidates. And the first thing that you should have in your written campaign plan is a list of campaign objectives. Okay? This is particularly true if you're running for a challenging office for the first time. The first objective of any campaign is naturally what? To win. That's the first objective. But you can have other objectives too. For example, you might have a series of secondary objectives. If you cannot win, what do you want to accomplish that will survive your campaign? Might be inject a certain issue into the discussion, elevate the issue of school choice, elevate the issue of property taxes being too high. Whatever it is, you've got secondary issues. Ross Perot successfully did this. He was not able to win the presidency, but if you remember, he was able to shift the discussion around federal deficits. Okay, that was successful. That was a secondary objective. And then you can have third objectives or tertiary objectives. Developing a list of media contacts, developing a list of donor contacts, developing a list of volunteer contacts, developing a list of people who are willing to endorse you. These are lists that have use after the campaign. If you're going to do a ballot initiative, you can use these resources. If you're going to run for office in the future, you can use these resources. If a friend of yours is going to run for office, you can use these resources. When I ran for governor in 1998, I knew I wasn't going to win the election. And so they said, well, Rich, if you know you can't win the election, why on earth are you running? And why are you putting yourself through all this? Well, I said, this is going to be a wipeout election, so I know I'm not going to be a spoiler, but look what I can accomplish. I can help to build county organizations. I can build all kinds of lists of people who can support us in all kinds of projects in the future. That's why I'm running. And I might be able to change the course of the debate, which I was able to do at a debate in Eugene when the Republican and Democratic candidates were not willing to issue their state budgets before Election Day. I worked with an organization called the Cascade Policy Institute, came out with a line-by-line budget. And in Eugene, I held it up. This is the budget. We can reduce expenses by such and such a percent. We can reduce taxes by such and such a percent. And within 48 hours, the Republican and Democrats were shamed by editorial boards into releasing budgets of their own. So even though I couldn't win the debate, I was able to make sure that people knew what the Republican and Democratic budgets were going to look like. So if you run for something, there are things you can accomplish short of winning the election. You want to win the election, but make sure you have what the objectives are. Second, as part of your written campaign plan, do a district overview, do an analysis of that overview, and then come up with a campaign strategy. Look at your district. What is the voter registration in your district? What is the average income of the district? What are the concerns of the district? What are the educational levels of your district? This is going to tell you the approach you want to take in talking to them. It's going to be informative about what issues are going to resonate and what issues are not going to resonate. It will tell you how to communicate with the potential constituency. So you want to take a look at those. Approaches toward achieving objectives. All major elements of the campaign will be discussed in this part of the written campaign plan. Among them are issue identification. You're going to identify what issues you want to push. Candidate positioning, where you want to position yourself on the political spectrum. And there are ways to do this if you're running for cemetery control board, believe it or not. Branding, media strategies, voter outreach, volunteer deployment, lots of different things. This is going to be a part of your written campaign plan. Now, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece. It can be just a few pages long, but if it contains these elements, you're going to be more likely to have a successful campaign than if you don't write a campaign plan. If you have even a modest written campaign plan, you're going to be more successful in enlisting donors and volunteers and activists than if you don't have a campaign plan. 4, campaign organization. Who's going to help you? Who's going to work for you? Who's going to be your campaign manager? Who's going to help get out the vote? Write down who those people's names are. Get them enlisted and make that a part of the written campaign plan. Implementation with rough chronology. I should probably change this to simply come up with a campaign calendar. And there's a trick to doing a campaign calendar. You do it backwards. Okay? If today is July 1st and election day is November 1st, I'm not going to make a campaign plan starting with July 1st and then do everything up to election day. I'm going to start after election day, writing thank you notes to supporters and volunteers, picking up campaign signs, then go to election day where I have the election night party, plan that, and then the get out the vote campaign the 2 weeks beforehand. You go backwards. You start after the election and you plan backwards. When the absentee ballots go out, when the ballots are mailed to the military, whatever they are, you put this all on the calendar. And this calendar provides the timing for your campaign, and it provides the structure with which you will execute your campaign plan. Are there any questions about that? A calendar starting backwards. Well, that's because I didn't know you then. Yeah, I guess it's mine. I should have known you. Yes. But what you find is if you start backwards, typically people are more thoughtful about what needs to be done beforehand, and you find that you deal with complicated issues first in your mind. If you start in July, there's less to do at the beginning of a campaign, and you put off thinking about it, and you end up using all the time, and you've compressed the important stuff. It's better that if you expand the important stuff and compress the stuff that's less important. Does that make sense to you?
I think it helps you kind of see the big picture.
Yes.
When you work backwards like that.
Yeah, it's very effective. Now, I did not do this when I was running for governor, and it's not the reason I lost, but I would have had a much smoother campaign if I'd have done it backwards.
Well, I look at the calendar and I think, gosh, what am I guess we just have to go with the flow, whatever turns out. And of course, I run in my life like that. That's why I work since I've always lived in Vancouver.
Yep.
Going backwards, you know that you're going to, that last 3 days, oh my gosh,
I'm going to, that's right. I'm going to indulge myself here and tell you a couple of war stories. When I did run for governor, I promised that I was going to campaign in all of Oregon's 36 counties. And I did this on the fly at the announcement press conference, and my campaign manager and the mayor, I didn't check with him before I said this. And he was like, what? And so we decided we're going to keep this promise. And one of the problems was Wheeler County. Wheeler County in Oregon has a total population of 1,200. There's no radio station. There's no newspaper. There's just 3 very small towns. And so I knew the mayor. The mayor endorsed me, so I won Fossil in Wheeler County, Oregon. And Buck Leckie, the school board president, and so I'm having lunch with them, and I said, what should I do? And he says, well, you can campaign by just going down Main Street and talking to the shop owners. We said, that's a good idea. Well, we're in suits, right? Which is bad, because going to Wheeler County is like transporting yourself to 1859, right? I would have fit if I'd have had a horse. I would have fit but I'm in a suit, and Adam's in a suit, and we're knocking on doors, and people are generally friendly, but we are way out of place. And then finally we saw a gun shop. It's a gun shop in Fossil, Oregon. Cool, let's go say hi. So Adam and I are there in 3-piece suits, and the owner was an 85-year-old guy who kind of shuffled out behind him. Yeah? Hi, I'm Richard Burke. I'm running for Oregon governor, and he just stood there. I said, yeah, and we noticed that you have this gun store. Yeah, he was scared. And then finally, we came by because we're supporters of the Second Amendment. And I lost my cool at that point, and I said, and all that stuff.
Oh, no.
Because I was a little bit flustered and awkward now. And so finally, he said thank you, and we shook hands. Turned out he thought we were with the ATF. He thought we were federal agents that were out to arrest him. We found that out later. And, so it's how you approach people, right? And when you campaign, that's why it's important to look at the demographics of the zone that you're campaigning in. Know the people that you're going to be talking to, and find a way to communicate with them successfully. Campaign budget. This includes an overall budget and summary of paid media costs if you're going to have any. Some costs, such as contracts for key campaign team members, are not yet known and will be added to the budget as they are secured. So come up with a budget of what you expect to spend on your campaign and make it a part of your written plan. And then finally, fundraising. Although the last section of the plan, this is the most important section because fundraising makes virtually everything else possible. That's not true in some of the smallest races where it's just person-to-person communication, but if you need to project a message, you are going to need to raise some money. While candidate fundraising should already be underway, this section will discuss fundraising by the candidate, staff, and by tertiary means. So what I like to say to people about fundraising is this. We're capitalists. We don't like the idea of begging for money because we need it. Limited government activists do not see need as a claim on what other people have. And so we don't like to go to people and say, I want a campaign to be your next commissioner. To campaign successfully, I need money, so give me some. This is not what limited government activists like to do. And so what I tell people is that we're looking at it completely wrong. Okay? Most people don't want to do politics. Most people don't have time to do politics. Right? So what are you doing? One thing capitalists do like is an exchange of value. Okay? If you're saying you want money because you need it, that's not something that capitalists like. But if you say, in exchange for your money, I'll give you a product or service that is worth that amount of money, that's honorable. Capitalists love that. That's what business is built on. That's what limited government is built on. So you have to remember that most people don't want to do politics. They have interests, but they're not willing to engage in order to advance them. Okay? But you are, right? If the person you're approaching is a limited government person, and you're a limited government person, you can simply say to them, look, you and I agree on basic values with respect to politics. You don't have the time to get engaged, but I have the time, and I'm stepping up. And if you will contribute to my campaign, I will represent the philosophy we share and have a smaller government to make you freer and make it easier for you to prosper. Okay? That's value for value. You're not begging for money because you need it. At Western Liberty Network, I have to raise money to do things. And when I go to donors, that's what I say. I say, you are a retired person, you don't want to drive all over Oregon and Washington, you don't want to do these things, but you want these values to be advanced. I'm advancing those values by training people how to implement them. So if you donate a tax-deductible amount of money to Western Liberty Network, I will do the work that you want to do but can't do. I will be, in effect, your, well, I don't want to use the word agent, but I will advance the beliefs that we share. If you do that when you're running for office, you are not begging for money. And what's that?
You'll be my lobby.
You could say something like that. You know, you don't want to imply that there's a quid pro quo or a contractual relationship, because that's not how it is. But you can say, if you will donate to my campaign because you believe in what I stand for, you can believe that I will advance the principles that we both share. And if you do that, you're not begging anymore. And if someone says, no, I'd like to, but I'm just not, that's just not where my priorities are, that's okay. You will not have humiliated yourself by begging. You will have offered an exchange of value. Now, if I say, I've got a car out there, it's $1,500, do you want to buy it? And if they say no, I don't, I need an SUV, not a car, I don't walk away humiliated. I tried to make a sale and the person said they didn't want it. That's not humiliating to anybody. If I'm begging, please, I need money, please give me $1,500, I've got this car, right? That's humiliating. And that's what most people think fundraising is when they're limited government activists. But that's not what it is. You're offering to advance the philosophy that people share. In exchange for a little bit of their money, you're giving a bunch of your time. And so it's like an honorable exchange, and if they say no, you don't have to feel humiliated, they don't have to feel humiliated. But if they agree to make a contribution, whether it's $5 or $5,000, you've got a partnership now, right? And that builds an investment. You've got an investment in time, they've got an investment in money. This is how movements get started. So do not be afraid to ask for money for your group, for your Tea Party group. Say to your limited government activist friends, look, I know you don't have time to do this stuff, but we do, and we're meeting every month, and we're training people how to run for office, and we're going to try to advance your interest here in Grant County. If you don't have time to come to meetings, if you don't have time to volunteer, fine. Donate $50, invest something. Get some skin in the game. This is for your benefit as well as ours. This is for our country. There's nothing humiliating about that. So if you're going to have a campaign, make fundraising a part of your campaign plan and make that approach a part of it as well. Other questions? So if you have a campaign plan that includes primary, secondary, and tertiary campaign objectives, if you've taken a good look at your district, analyzed it, and developed an overall campaign strategy, you've come up with some approaches toward achieving your objectives, you've got a campaign organization and people to do specific jobs for you, you've got a campaign calendar, you know when things are going to happen, you've got a budget, and you've got a plan to fundraise, you've got a campaign plan. And at the local nonpartisan level, most candidates don't come up with one. Most of them don't have one. So if you have one, you've got a tremendous advantage. So anyway, that is my training. Those are my 4 trainings. And again, I want to talk about a couple things before I completely stop. And the first is, I want to let you all know about our website, westernlibertynetwork.org. If I've given you a business card, then you have it on the card, westernlibertynetwork.org. Yes?
The only thing that was on there was a flyer. When I went to get it, people thought, "Oh, is this the right one?" The only thing that I saw on there was a flyer for a class.
For this meeting? Yeah. Okay.
No, I was looking before.
Oh, on the Western Liberty Network. Well, what you should see is a headline announcing the conference, photographs of the main speakers, and then
Lars Larson is this year then, not because it said.
we're going to have Lars Larson and Catherine Timpf of Fox News, and myself and Noah Wall of Freedom Works. He's the head director for the Washington, D.C. Freedom Works office. And on the right, you'll see you can download the agenda. You can click on it and get the full agenda of the conference. And if you want to sign up, the red button will let you sign up. If you want to sponsor, another red button will let you sponsor. But anyway, go to westernlibertynetwork.org and take a look at this. We're going to have our annual conference on February 1st at the Crown Plaza Hotel in Lake Oswego. It's a drive, but believe me, this is worth it. This is our 9th annual, and we know these things are good. Somebody bought 23 tickets last night. Still trying to figure out who it was. But we're expecting a full house, and we have 20 breakout sessions loaded with things like this along 4 tracks of instruction. And we've got public speaking training. We've got a couple of speech coaches that are going to be there. And of course, we've got the 3 assemblies with the featured speakers. And so we give the inspiration and the information to be successful. And the theme is always take the offensive, is what it is. We want to get on the offensive. So I encourage all of you to go to that conference. And again, if you saw value in the training today, I'd encourage you to throw something in the envelope here so Natasha and I can get enough gas to get home. But I'll tell you, I love this work. I love meeting people like you. I love working with organizations like you. Now, you heard me at the beginning of this presentation discuss the concept of independent affiliates. And I would like to encourage the Grant County Tea Party to become a Western Liberty Network affiliate. The cost is $0, and the written agreement says that neither side is subject to or subordinate to the other or an organ of the other, and that the relationship is that in exchange for providing training content free of charge, that the leadership of the Tea Party group makes training opportunities known to the rank and file members, and that they will participate in an annual conference and quarterly conference calls to share best practices with the many other Western Liberty Network affiliates that exist in Oregon, Washington, and Texas, soon to be in a bunch of other states. This is a growing organization. We think we've got the right concept. We think this is the right approach to change the political culture in this country, so that if we have victories in the future, they can be sustained over time to create enduring change. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that's true. I mean, if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a communist or a Green or whatever it is, take this information and do whatever you want with it. Western Liberty Network is nonpartisan staunchly, but we are in support of limited government principles, and I hope that we'll see you in February. And Natasha and I are willing to come back to provide training on any of the topics we train on at any time you like. So that's all, and I thank you very much for your time and attention. We've got tracks. Yeah, we've got a track of classes, how to lobby public or public officials. We have a beginning and an advanced. We've got a course on how to testify in front of public boards and commissions. And there's a group called Oregon Citizens Lobby that teaches you how to track legislation. It's Oregon specific, but it applies to Washington or any state for that matter, is how to track legislation. And that's just one track. We've got 4 tracks of instruction. One is how to defeat liberal attempts to silence free speech. And we've got a course on Alinsky and how to blunt attacks that you're racist or sexist, and a variety of other things. We've got a block of training on how to be a good citizen lobbyist. We've got a block of training on how to get elected to local offices. We've got a block of training on how to organize campaigns and organizations. So in between that, we've got the main speeches. On Friday night, before the convention, or before the meeting, we have an annual reception. It is largely unstructured. Most of the major speakers come. It's a good place to get pictures taken. We always have some sort of a bar there, and sometimes live music, and it's a great icebreaker, and it's been a big hit. It's starting to get a reputation for a really good party, yes. And so anyway, I've been up here talking too much. I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Ken, and thank you all for your attention.
Finally, I get the mic, right? Just want to thank you all for coming, and please be generous with Western Liberty Network. If you want to donate to Informed Citizen Network, you can go on the website there, and they'll give you an address. You can send us a check. We're 100% volunteer. I pay my own gas coming and going, at this point at least. And so if you want to donate, you're welcome to. I hope that we'll continue to work together. I'm an affiliate, or excuse me, my organization is an affiliate of Western Liberty Network, and I think it's a great arrangement. We need to learn how to be allies and be good allies, and it's like Benjamin Franklin said, gentlemen, we'll either hang together or they'll hang us one at a time. And it is really, I think a lot of us feel that we need to do better, and this is a great way to do it. Thank you very much. Oh,